Hello, everyone, and welcome to Thorough Newspaper Analysis, which is brought to you by LawSikho. So, today we have two articles for discussion. The first one is from The Hindu. Is India's digital services tax discriminatory? So, in this, we'll firstly understand that what do we mean by the digital services tax, and secondly, why has it been recently called to be discriminatory by the United States State Trade Representative? And the second one is from the Indian Express. Direct access to government gilt bonds, what to look at before investing. Basically, here we'll understand that what do we mean by the government securities and how much is it safe to invest our money into government securities. And thirdly, we have the news in flash column. If you're also preparing for judicial services exam, you can have a look at the lot of the courses, which is the judiciary test prep course from LawSikho. The link to this course is there in the description box, and from the landing page, you can download free study material for your own preparation. You can also have a look at our other courses like for CLAT, All India Bar Exam and SEBI. And as we know that there is this latest addition in our courses for the limited insolvency examination from IBBI. And you can have a look at this amazing course as well. The preparation is going to be really great with this. With this, let's see what is the multiple choice question from yesterday's discussion. Tianwan 1 is the Mars mission of, your options are UAE, Canada, South Korea, or China. So this is the descriptive question for the day. What is digital services tax? How does it add to the economy? So basically last month, the United States Trade Representative investigation report found India's DST, which is the digital services tax, to be discriminatory and inconsistent with prevailing principles of international taxation. So with this, firstly, we need to understand that what is the digital services tax in this. So basically in 2016, on the recommendation of the Akhilesh Ranjan committee, now this committee report should be, it should be kept in mind, please keep it in mind, that it was after this committee, Akhilesh Ranjan committee report, that this tax, which is the DST, digital services tax, which commonly in India is also known as the Google tax, or in a basic understanding, it is actually a kind of equalization tax or an equalization levy. We'll understand the basic meaning of it. So on the recommendation of this report, this tax was suggested to create level playing field between businesses which do not have physical presence. A very good example of this is, let's say that some company has set up a manufacturing hub in our country, India. Now, this company is a foreign company and it actually made a physical construction, had a physical office or any kind of physical building or something that is there in the territory of our country. So definitely that will be taxed by the government. But let's say there is another company, for example, Google, which does not, for example, have any office in the country, but is still providing some services to a lot of people or a lot of citizens or a lot of people residing in the country. In that case, there is no physical presence of this particular company, but still this company is able to earn in the exchange of services it is providing to the citizens of this country, India. In such a situation, what used to happen was that only the countries that had physical presence, as in that had physical offices or physical industries or manufacturing hubs in our country, they were taxed, their profits and their income was taxed. But these companies which were providing advertisement, for example, which were providing online advertisement or other online services, they were not being able to be taxed. That is why this tax is also called as the equalization levy, which ultimately puts the physical companies as well as these internet providers or these service provider companies at a level field, and it makes sure that both of them are equally taxed. Now, obviously, the percentage may vary from company to company and the kind of company, but yes, it is made sure that they are both taxed, at least they're both taxed. So I hope the very concept of this is clear to you as to why is it called an equalization levy or an equalization tax and what kind of services are there. So in this, we need to keep in mind that when we talk about the DST, which is the digital services tax, it is applied in two fields. Firstly, for online advertising, like for example, one particular person who lives in India uses the services of Google for advertising any product or making any kind of advertisement at the online level. So one, that service, the remuneration that has been gained through this service by Google will be taxed by India. And secondly, the second thing that is included in this is e-commerce, which is very recently in the last year it was included. So India became the first country to implement the equalization levy on advertising services at 6%. And the step taken was after OECD failed to reach a consensus on such tax. By OECD, it is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. So basically, most of the countries of the world are a part of the OECD. And it had said, the OECD earlier had said that we will come on a particular consensus. That is, we will all come together and decide upon a common system of taxation in terms of the of such services or such online platforms. But in the long run, ultimately, OECD failed to come up with any kind of consensus on such tax, and that is why India decided to go by itself, and it became the first country in the world to implement this equalization tax, or the Google tax, or the digital services tax. In 2020, it expanded the new equalization levy scope, including to e-commerce, as we just discussed. That till from 2016 until to 2020, it was only for online advertisement. So the taxes, it was only on the it was advertising of on the online platform. But in 2020, it was further extended to e-commerce as well. By e-commerce, we mean various sites like Amazon, etc. Flipkart also, but Flipkart is a Indian e-commerce site. So otherwise, if there is any site which is there from outside like Amazon, so that will be included under this taxation system. So here India also has said very clearly that this kind of levy is temporary in nature, and if the OECD comes and reaches at a particular consensus in the future, India will definitely shed off this taxation and will take up whatever consensus comes up in the coming future. But still, India will make sure that till the time OECD comes to a consensus, it is not losing upon this huge remuneration in the terms of this digital services tax. But in this article, a very good comparison has been drawn between India's DST, that is India's digital taxation system, and United Kingdom's DST. It says that India's DST is very narrow as in it is not really very much acceptable. The nature of it is not that is something very acceptable, and rather UK's DST is something that is far more, it makes more sense, and it is also far more equitable. So according to the UK's DST, that is Digital Services Tax, no tax if the company's net operating margin is negative. But in India, tax is levied on the revenue as opposed to being a tax on the profits. I'll make you try to make you understand this with a simple example. Let's say the company is investing rupees 100 in providing a particular service. And in return of that service, the company is able to earn a total of rupees 120. So the profit of this company would be 120 minus the net investment that it itself had made, that would be rupees 20. So here the profit is something that is taxed according to UK's digital taxation system. But in India, it is not taxed on the profits, rather it is taxed on the entire revenue. So for example, if this country was investing 100 rupees in providing a particular service, but in return it got, let's say, only 80 rupees, and it made absolutely no profit, but yes, a revenue of 80 rupees was made in return, so it will still be taxed. So this is something really very arbitrary, and also many times it can be seen to be unfair to that particular service provider, because he's absolutely earning no profits from you, and still he has to pay tax to you. Secondly, only 50% of revenue if transaction involves 3 jurisdictions, and here there is no such provision. So it says that if the revenue is coming from 3 different transactions, so only 50% of the revenue of that would be taxed. But here there is absolutely no provision of any such provision. And companies selling their own inventories are excluded and covers everything. So here many a times what happens is that the company that is selling its own inventory. Now inventory altogether is a different concept to be understood in the terms of economy. Basically it is many a times it is construed to be the leftover things which it has to clear up in the next coming year. So these inventories if the company is selling so that it does not go in loss, so if that is the case, then such companies are excluded from making any from paying any taxes. But in India, there is no exclusion whatsoever. So the way forward here are 3 options. Firstly, the OECD should come up with a common consensus and design for such digital taxation. The UN's design and bilateral negotiation. So these are the things that can be looked forward for digital services taxation. So the second article talks about direct access to government gilt bonds. Basically, the RBI, the Reserve Bank of India, has proposed to provide direct access to retail investors to its government securities. 2 things here are very important to be understood. Firstly, what do we mean by the retail investors? And secondly, what do we mean by government securities? Basically, the retail investors are those investors that are at the last of this chain of investors. Otherwise, we have the mutual fund investors, we have various other, like we have saving schemes, we have other kinds of investors who are there, but the retail investors are the lowest one that can actually invest into very small amounts as well. And by government securities, we mean that these are the debt instruments. I'll tell you the meaning of debt instruments as well. So these are the debt instruments issued by the government and considered the safest form of investment. Basically, debt instruments are, if you remember, when we studied law, we study the Act of Negotiable Instruments Act as well. So a check, for example, is a negotiable instrument. So this is a kind of a piece of paper which we get in return, or which we give to the bank, and in return what we get is the money. So that also is a kind of instrument, and that is why this is a kind of piece of paper against which we get the debt. So it is a debt instrument. I hope you're getting this, that some amount of money is given to the government as a debt. Now, here, one thing you need to keep in mind, that we do not take debt from the government. Rather, we are the investors. We invest our money in the government. We give our money to the government, and in exchange of that money, what we get are these debt instruments, the government securities. So here on a piece of paper, the government writes down that so and so person, so and so whoever this investor is, has given the government so and so amount of money, and the government shall be liable to pay this amount of money at an interest rate of this within a time period of this. So that is a complete instrument, which is the debt instrument, and government security itself is a kind of debt instrument. Other than this, we also have like the government bonds also we have, then we have the treasury bills. So there are different kinds of debt instruments depending upon their variable nature. So the debt instruments are issued by the government. So obviously we know, because who is lending the money? The investor is lending the money. And who is taking the money? It is the government. So definitely who is taking the money will be issuing the debt instrument. And thus it is considered the safest form of investment. Now, why? Why are government securities considered to be the safest form of investment? Because it is the government, the sovereign government, that is giving you the guarantee to pay you back. So many a times there will be crisis in the economy of the government. Many a times the government might have a great fiscal deficit going on, but still your money shall be paid back no matter what. There might be, in even in the worst case scenario, there might be a delay in paying the particular amount which you had given to the government as a debt, but it is for sure that it will be paid back to you. So no any institution, no bank, nobody else can give you this kind of sovereign guarantee as the government can to repay your money back. And that is why the debt instruments, that is the government securities, are called as the safest form of investment. Which means, so many times basically, see what happens is, like let's say the condition of market is not really good. By this we mean that the government or the banks are not really offering good interest rates, and that is why we do not want to keep any kind of fixed deposits or other kinds of savings in the bank, because we're not getting anything much in return. Or we feel that the government, the market is not safe to invest. That way it can be crashed, maybe the inflation can be too much, or a lot of things can go on, in which we might have this fear that this particular person whom we are lending money to, or this any particular institution or authority whom we are lending this money to, that might get dissolved, that might get completely insolvent, and we might not be able to get our money back. In such situations, people prefer to invest more in the government, because maybe there is a chance that the state and situation of government might also not be good, but still it will be the safest one, and it will definitely it will return back and repay our money. So the proposal that has recently been given by the Reserve Bank of India is that now the retailers will be able to buy the GSECs, that is the government securities, directly through RBI's retail direct facility. Earlier, what used to happen was that the retail investors or the retailers like you and I, any one of us, we were not allowed to buy these government securities directly from the RBI. We could participate in the auction, or we could participate in other forms of procuring of these government securities, but that made it a bit of cumbersome process. But now, for raising more money and for making the process more feasible for the investors, The retailers will now be allowed to buy government securities from the RBI's direct retail direct facility, which is called as the eKuber account. It is aimed at deepening the government securities market and to help smooth sailing of government's large yearly borrowing program of 12 lakh crore. So the idea behind providing the government securities is that see, for carrying out various tasks and for doing a lot of investments and spending a lot, the government needs a lot of money, right? Now, for many things, for many kinds of demands, the government takes loans. So many times the government has to take loans from the international sources like the World Bank and other Asian Development Bank, etc. Here, the government says that is it not better that if at all we have to procure some money, if at all we have to take some debt, then why not take this debt from our own people? So that is the very idea behind this. And it says that we want to widen, we want to broaden the market for government securities, and we want to increase our chances of getting this borrowing program of 12 lakh crore rupees from our own people itself, and we will take money from our own investors and we will give them the government securities in the exchange or in the security of that particular money. And thus it opens the door to this risk free investment for retailers. So it is a kind of win-win situation, because here at the international level also we do not have this huge debt to pay back, firstly, which is good for government, and for the investors it is very safe to invest in the government. So basically it is a kind of win-win situation. So the implications of this step would be it will support government's expanding borrowing program, definitely, because government will now have more people from which it can now take any kind of debt. And secondly, pose competition to fixed deposit of banks and other debt instruments. I'll give you a very clear example of this. See, let's say, for example, till date, retailers or the retail investors like you and I, we were not allowed to buy the government securities directly. So that is why, if at all we had to invest our money, where did we go? We used to go for fixed deposits in the bank or other kind of debt instruments which were easily available through private or other banks. But now, if we have the option that we can invest our money in the safest area, so would we not prefer to go over there over the banks? So that is why it will definitely lead to have a competition for the banks, which earlier were the only place where we could in banks and other such similar institutions where we could invest our money. So definitely this will raise the competition for them, because now even the government can call off or call for these investments. So these are some things which again tell that how investors can benefit from the government securities. Firstly, it is the safest debt instrument which we have. It cannot be emphasized enough that it is additional revenue besides the fixed deposits, small savings schemes, tax-free bonds, and bond funds of mutual funds. So these are all kinds of similar. These are all, in some other way they are the same kinds of instruments, but yes, in their nature they vary a bit. Then to earn interest, obviously, like for example, I gave the government 1,000 rupees, and the government promises me that it will give me an interest of, let's say, some X percentage. So definitely in the return, whenever I'll get this money back, it is not just these 1,000 rupees that I'll get back. Maybe I'll get 1,200 rupees or 1,300 rupees. So definitely the investor will be able to earn interest over their principal amount that they have invested in the government. Thirdly, capital gains by trading. So by capital gains here we mean that you do not really have to get a lot into this concept, but see, let's for say example, I invested 1,000 rupees in the government and I got this government security saying that I have invested 1,000 rupees in this government. So let's say the maturity period of this particular security bond or the government security is let's say 5 years. So after 5 years, I will get my money back along with my interest. But meanwhile, since I am the owner of this government security now, I can also sell off this government security to somebody else, and ultimately that particular benefit will go to him and I'll get some money in the between. So this will be called as the capital gain, and that option is also available with the investors. And fourthly, low investment risks. That is good for retirement, which is that in the if it at all your bond or the government security matures, let's say in 20 to 30 years. So definitely you do not have to worry about the current market changes that are going on. Maybe there could be a lot of inflation, or there could be a lot of other issues going on. So you don't really have to worry about it, because it is after 20 or 30 years after the retirement you will be able to get it, and thus you can be very you can ease out yourself of the ongoing problems in the market. So here the risks that are involved are that it can be highly volatile. so that they can be highly volatile at times, keeping in mind that some market changes may take place. So sometimes it might not be very good for short-term investors, but yes, for long-term investors, it is very safe and sound. So you can go through these. This is the entire process of issuing of the government securities. What's good, what's not. You can go through this as well. So let's see, what do we have for news in flash today? Rare disease and the rare medicine to it. A gene therapy costing rupees 16 crore is the only medicine for around 200 children who are suffering with this rare genetic disease called as spinal muscular atrophy, which is type 1 of it, which is a rare genetic disease spreading out that is noticed in Karnataka. Basically, it cannot really spread out because it's a genetic disease. So a lottery is held once in 2 weeks by Swiss drug maker Novartis for the SMA children across the world for their treatment. Basically, their therapy is one-time infusion that takes place around an hour. So this infusion is of the correcting gene, which can actually correct the nervous cells which are causing the problem. So the disease is caused by loss of the nerve cells which carry electrical signals from the brain to the muscles, and if at all, both and a pair of them exist actually in the child, and one is gotten from the mother and the other comes from the father. And this disease is caused if both the genes, both the from father and mother, were faulty. So the name of this disease should be kept in mind, and it is a rare genetic disease. So this was all for the day. We hope it was a good session for you. Thank you so much for staying tuned with Law Seekho.